Welcome everyone, my name is Jeff Smith, and today I'm going to give you a exhaustive tour of database actions, formerly known as SQL Developer Web. And when I say exhaustive, I mean this is going to be more than my 10-minute video. This might be more like 30, 40, 50 minutes. I don't know until I'm done and we finish cutting it. I'm going to include chapter bookmarks or jump points in the description so you can skip to the things that you want to see. And if you want, or if you think it's a good idea, leave me a comment below, and I'll even take certain chapters and publish them as standalone videos. All right, so let's get into it. What you see on my screen now is the home page, or what we call the launch pad for database actions. So this is when you first log in, this is your navigation screen. It shows you all of the major features that you have access to. The cards that you see here are determined by one of two things. If you're in the Oracle Cloud and the autonomous database cloud services, you'll see different cards here. There are certain cards that are exclusive to autonomous, and there are certain cards here that are disabled for autonomous. So I'm running Oracle REST Data Services, or ORDS, locally here on my machine. That's why you see localhost in the URL. And the URL you would have wherever your mid-tiers are running, wherever ORDS is running. That's where SQL Developer Web or Database Actions, this single-page web app, is running out of. And so I'm also logged in as an administrator account. So it says I'm logged in as HR, but my HR is special. I use the HR account because it's 2 letters and everyone knows what HR is, but I've granted my account basically God privs. So I'm seeing everything for my local 19C on-premises Oracle database. So these cards are links. You can jump to these different features. At any point during your use in the session, you can also click on this hamburger button here and you'll get a mega menu that you can easily, quickly navigate to the different features so you don't have to come back to the launch pad at any time. Over here on the right, you've got your authenticated user, you've got your preferences, you can see which version of database actions you're running, and you can also sign out and sign back in as a different database user if you want. Let's start with the most common feature, and that's the SQL worksheet. So this is where you can run your ad hoc queries, your scripts, you can create your stored procedures, and you're going to have access to a lot of the same features that you have in the desktop tools that you've been using from us for like the past 20 years. So I've got access to things like SQL history, and I'm accessing things that I've ran previously using Control Up and Control Down on my keyboard. Control Enter runs the query. I get the results back in this grid. I can right-click on the grid and do things like see how many rows are here. I can do an export, which is, of course, everyone's favorite feature. Get this data out to Excel quickly. So a wide range of export options here. Now, when you export data in this web app, you basically are going to do a file download. Also got a single record view here. So if you have a wide table, this table is fairly wide. This might be easier for browsing single records. So this opened up in what we call a slider panel. There is a cancel button on the bottom, but you can always hit the escape key to automatically close these, and that's going to be a common theme in the tool. Let's get a more interesting query. I'm lazy, so I'm just looking for stuff that I've done before. This one's not super complicated, but if you want to format your code, that's built into the tool. Make it a little bit cleaner to read. Showed you Control Enter. We also have script engine support. So F5 or this button, and it runs the code just like it would in SQL+. So I've got this kind of text output. I could do things like set page size 100, set, or we could do select star from all objects, but I'm going to throw in my CSV hint just like we have in the desktop. And you've got the output automatically formatted as CSV. It was bang, right? So obviously you can get execution plans if you want. That would be this button. It's very similar output to what you'd see in the desktop. We also have auto trace. Auto trace says, run the query, show me the plan, but also show me the statistics. Oops, clicked the wrong button. So here are my session statistics as the query ran, and then here's the plan for that query. If you want to see all of your SQL history, that's here. You can add filters here to show me just the interesting ones. So as I come up here and cycle through these, it's just going to show those queries. This is the this is the list of queries and scripts that I've ran in this browser on this database. So if I jump over to a different browser on a different machine, I'm not going to see the same history here. The history is persistent, though, between sessions. This is not the default view for the worksheet. You can see I've kind of got this dark theme going. If I come into preferences, you can see where we've got a few things here for you to try. So light, this is the default view. I like dark, high contrast. I've also bumped my font size up a good bit. There's a ruler set here at 200, which paints a vertical line. You may or may not like those. We got our line numbers on. Minimap, if you're working with like huge text, it paints a little picture of your editor in the right-hand corner so you can see where you're at in the buffer. Help with your queries, we've got that just like you've got in the desktop. So I can say, hey, I've got my employees table here. Here's my list of columns, but I can also just type from employees and control space bar. This gives me a list of those columns, and I could say I want first name. I'm hitting tab to complete that. I could say, I don't know. It's not null, and again, control enter to execute. So this query ran. You can see how long it took to run. If you come up here and delete this and you can't remember where this data came from, you can click here and see the SQL statement that this result set belongs to. If you have mistakes in your code, like here's a common one, misspell from, where our parser is painting on the screen where we think there's an issue. So it's not recognizing this form word and it's showing up as the word after that. There's an issue here. If you mouse over it, we tell you what we think the issue is. You can also click here to see that. And over here on the right-hand side, you can see there's like a red area telling us where the syntax issue is. So if you've got a big long script of hundreds of lines, that can be useful. A lot of your memorized Oracle commands are supported here. So if I want to do a describe on employees, I can do that. I just run that as a script. We have newer commands as well. I can say info. That'll tell us more than just the column names and the data types. It'll also show us what the primary key is, what the table comments are, what the statistics look like. Of course, it's doing more work, so it'll take a little bit longer to run. Primary key here is denoted with this little asterisk. Lots and lots of goodies here. If you're more of a reader and less of a TV watcher, and you say, hey, Jeff, I just want to read about this stuff, click the little help button here. This brings up the context-sensitive help documentation. Lots of good stuff here. All the keyboard shortcuts. You can move this around, put it over on the right side if you want. It's quite nice, actually. The help. Oh, what else do we have in here? So this worksheet has a navigation that's similar to what you have in the desktop tool, but instead of using a tree, it's got a drop-down view. So I'm logged in as HR, so that's the default view for my objects. And we put you into tables because that's where people generally like to start. But you can see all of the different things here. I can say all objects and type imp. And it's going to find a fuzzy search, all of the objects in my schema that start with M, so that's kind of cool. We have dialogues for these objects. So here's my employees table. If I right-click on that, I can say open, and we get one of those slider panels. So here is the definition of the table. So I've got the column definition, but I can also see indexes on the table. I can see privileges on the table. I can see my table statistics. Here's the fun one, data. So instead of writing select star from employees, I can just open this panel and go immediately to the data. So this is a read-write view if you have the privileges in order to make changes to the table. So if I want to create a new row in the employees table, I can click this button and just fill out the details. If I want to make a change to a table, to a record, let's say I want to change guy's hire date. Just click the little pencil icon and have another slider that comes out, and this is a nice calendar view. I can say, actually, they were hired on November 1st. Click Save. So it's giving me an indicator that there's a pending change on this column. So I could do a bunch of work in here, and I would have the different columns painted. And when I'm ready to commit the changes, I do exactly what it looks like I should do. I just click the commit button. So that posted the change to the database, and I got my little indicator here. And then when I'm done, I just click escape, like I said, and it closes. I've got a more interesting table here. Select star from blobs. So binary large objects, or blobs, are basically files, and you can store anything in there you want, or anything that makes sense for you to store in an Oracle database. And you'll see here in this grid, it just says blob in parentheses, but as I mouse over it, I get this pencil icon again. And we're able to detect the MIME type. It's a GIF. And so if I click on image here, it'll actually render the picture, which is kind of cool. If the browser understands the MIME type, we'll be able to allow you to work with it. Or you can just simply download the file. Now, if I edit this table, that's not the correct nomenclature. If I open the table and I go into the data, there is a blob editor here as well. So I can load a new file up to replace this if I'd like. So I'm just going to escape to cancel that, and hit escape to cancel that again, and I'm back to where we started. Now we do have actual table editors. So a lot of stuff going on here. because you've got tons of properties you can set on a table. But the dialog should be somewhat self-explanatory. If I want to add a new column, I come to the columns page, I click the plus button, I put in the details. So what do I want the new column to be? The new call. What do I want the data type to be? Lots of choices, almost too many choices in Oracle. But I want a date. And I could set a default property on it. I could say by default it's going to be sysdate. And if I want to see what this is going to look like, this is the code that would be generated if I click the apply button. And I did click the apply button, and it did make the change. And if I come back up here to the columns view, I can see that I got it. I could also add some comments. Doing a YouTube demo, does it make sense? Put okay, whatever. And again, click on the DDL page. Here's the thing that we're going to run for you. You could do all this in SQL worksheet if you know how to type it. This is just a helper for you if you'd like it. Click apply. Come back to columns. There's my comment. And if I went and did the info command on this table, I would see this metadata show up in our output. So you can create new tables from scratch. You would just click the create object here versus right-clicking on an existing object to do an edit. Data loading. So this is interesting, right? So let's create a new table from an existing file on my machine. I'm going to try to pick an easy one. So here's some data. I've got some options that I can set in the data if I want. Like in the encoding. Encoding looks a little bit off because some of these aren't being read correctly, so I need to go figure out how this is originally stored, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. You can see how the strings are being delimited, how we're parsing and reading those. How many rows do we want to read in the data set? This helps us figure out how wide to size the columns, but I'm just going to go with these. And now we need to actually name the columns. So I actually want this to be called customer ID, so I can override these if I want. I can leave them as is if I want. I can uncheck these if I don't actually want that column included. Do we have a primary key? Yes, I do. It's this. As I scroll over, you can see what those fields are again. What's the table name going to be called? You can see there's a conflict on customer, so we just went ahead and called it customers 02. Here's how we're going to bring it in. Now, does it make sense to bring everything as varchar 2 4000? Maybe not, but you can also adjust these data types if you want. And also the precision. So postal code, I know 10 is going to be okay. Country 100 is going to be okay. Is there any harm with using 4000? In general, no, because it's a varchar, so it's varying length. Where you might get into trouble is if you start building composite indexes. That's an index of multiple columns. These extra wide varchars can limit you on how much data could be included in those indexes. That's more of a data modeling issue, which I have videos for if you want to look into that. So if we click here on data loading, we can see customers 2, 100 rows came in, 3 failed. You can see the 3 rows that failed. So I can go fix those. Or I can simply say, select star from customers 02 and see my new data, my new table contents. one last thing here in this worksheet. I can do drag and drop. So I want to do a select. So it just wrote that for me. If I expand employees, you can see this column list here as well. Let's say I want first name, last name, hire date, salary. And then format, run. So you can use the keyboard, you can use the mouse. There's a couple different ways to get help generating your code. Speaking of code, if we switch over to, let's look at my procedures. So if I drag and drop this over, we'll generate a PL/SQL block for you. So we know what the input parameters are that are required. We need a date, for example. And we also need a date for end date. Job ID, I don't know. SH clerk 81. So as I'm typing this stuff, we're building this anonymous block down here below for you. And then when you're done, there's not a run button, but there's an insert code into worksheet button. Now that I've got the code in here, now that I've got what I need, now I can run this. And it's not going to find anything, I don't think. Yeah, so I'm trying to insert something, and the data I'm giving it doesn't line up with the data model, so it gets rejected. And if I want more information on this, I click on the info button, and you can see the code that was associated with that error. I said I was done with the worksheet, but I kind of lied. So let's look at my employees again. We're seeing this data in a grid. Grids are nice, but sometimes it's easier to understand data visually. Pictures, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So I've got this button here, create chart. So I can create a chart called, I don't know, salary by department. Sums up how much money people make by their department ID. Okay, so let's not worry about the chart type yet, but let's worry about the columns that we're going to look at. So the label column is going to be department ID, and the value column is going to be salary. So this is a preview of what's going to look like. So department 90 is doing pretty good for themselves, and poor department 10. Yeah, who knows what's going on with them. So let's sort this descending. And now let's look at our chart types. This one's kind of funky, but it just shows you the flexibility of what's in here. Probably the one that makes the most sense for this would be a standard. Standard bar chart. So if I click create, this creates this chart, and it takes me to the charting interface. And then I can say, hey, build the chart for me. So it basically publishes this chart on this URL that you can now share with people, assuming you've properly secured it. And I'm not going to talk about that at the moment, but the charting feature, it's step one in a general overview. Sorry, a general project we have for helping people build reports and dashboards. And so you'll be able to generate reports that have combinations of grids and charts in a page, that all based and powered by individual SQL statements. Now, I told you about the navigation. If you remember, I said you can go home by clicking here, but you could also click on this button here and it brings up the magic menu or the mega menu. So I come back to SQL. We're back right where we started. So that's the SQL worksheet. If you want to take your own tour of any of these features, that's what this binoculars button is. And it literally takes you on a guided tour of the feature. All right, next feature, data modeler. So let's just model a schema. Let's model HR. And let's add all the objects to the schema. So here we go. It creates a relational diagram. I can see a bunch of stuff. It's just kind of junk that I've thrown in here. And then I've got the HR that people are more familiar with. So if I click on employees, I got the metadata over here on the right. I can move things around. I can change some color schemes if I want. Just to get funky. I can add pictures to this, like literal pictures, like you could add your corporate logo up here if you wanted to. And if I wanted to save this out, I can do that. If I want to generate a DDL script based on the information stored in this diagram, I can do that as well. I can save these diagrams. So if I come over here and say new, so I'm starting off with a blank canvas again. If I wanted to reopen a diagram that I've already worked with, I just toggle over to the toggle over to the diagrams panel. I've got my list of designs here. If I click on this, we actually give you a little thumbnail preview of what that diagram looks like, and you can also see what's in the diagram. The search is kind of cool too. So I can limit what shows up here by searching anything in the diagram or anything inside the model. Okay, moving on, REST. So SQL Developer Web or Database Actions is built, delivered, serviced by Oracle REST Data Services, which is the technology we use to make REST APIs for your Oracle database available. So we use Database Actions as the primary interactive development environment for building those REST APIs, and this is that interface. So from my schema, I can see that I've got 7 modules published. I've got 5 objects REST enabled. I have 1 OAuth 2 client. I've got 12 roles to protect my REST APIs, and I've got 8 privileges down to specific REST service endpoints. Okay, so, and I've also got a list down here of things that I've worked on recently. So here's that chart that I just built. It's also backed by APIs. Let's build a new REST API from scratch. So I'm going to go into modules. I'm going to create a module. This is going to be a very simple one. I've got a full video tutorial series on just working with the REST service. So this module name, it's arbitrary. You can call it anything you want. So we'll call it YouTube demo. So this is how the items in this module are going to be addressed in the URI. And I don't know, YT. So as I type that, you can see what the URL is going to start looking like. And if I want to document these, just a silly git. So now I need to actually start building the templates and then the handlers behind those. So template, this is how you model the entity or the collections or the items of what you're accessing with your APIs. And we'll just do the standard employees. So we'll do employees slash get everyone. I'm not going to go to the handlers because I want to create another template. And this time we'll do employees ID. Single employee. And I did say let it go to the handlers. So now we need to build the code behind the endpoint. So I'm going to do a get. This is a single employee. So I'm going to say this is not a collection query. This is a collection item. I'm going to say select star from employees where employee ID equals ID. And create. So here's the code behind this. And if I wanted to test this, we can do that, but we're going to do that in a second. I want to come back to my list of templates because I need to build the handler behind this. So I could also do a post here and give you a method to insert new employees to the table. But again, that's a longer job. So I'm just going to say select star from employees, and that's it, except I'm also going to say order by salary descending. So I could test this to make sure it's bringing me back the data that I want to see. Yep, looks about right. So if I come back to my module, I've got my two templates, I've got my two handlers, and I can say, hey, let's go pull up the Open API view for this REST API. So here's my doc I put there. Here's my doc I put here. I say, hey, let's try this out. Here's my response. Let's go try this one. So this one has a required parameter. So it's this here. And we're going to say that's 101. Here's employee number 101. There's one other aspect to REST I should talk about, and that's the auto feature. Instead of writing this code, you can simply point in an object and enable it. And you can do that for tables, views, and stored procedure or PL/SQL objects. And when you enable that, we're going to publish various templates and handlers behind it. So for a table, I can get all records. I can get a single record. I can post up a record. I can post up thousands or millions of records. I can change a record and I can delete a record. And regardless of what you want to do, we give you a UI to help you build out the curl script that you can then go and insert in your apps or use to teach yourself. On the security side, built in, we have OAuth 2 support, so you can create clients and you can assign roles and privileges to those clients, which tells orgs when the user is authenticated and authorized based on their roles, what things they get to touch in its domain. So that's the REST bit. On to JSON. So the Oracle database can store JSON documents inside of relational tables, or using a feature called SODA, or the JSON document store, you can tell the Oracle database to work like like a NoSQL or Mongo type system, where you're working with collections and you're inserting documents inside of those collections. Now, I've already created a collection called tweets. I've taken all of my Twitter history, downloaded it as a massive JSON zip file, and then I put it into my Oracle database, and now it's being stored as this collection. And so I can now browse it. So this open closed bracket is a pattern matching kind of string that's used to describe the data that I want to see. So here are all of those documents. Now if I double click in here, I get a full page editor for, in this case, for that tweet. And I can make changes to this if I want. I've got query history here too. So here are all my tweets where I've mentioned Chris Rice. Writing these can be kind of a challenge if you've never done it before, so we give you assistance built into the tool. Here are all of the functions you've got access to. And we also go into the documents to pull out all of the attributes that you can reference. Kind of nice. We can also add sorting. And you basically just fill in the details here. So instead of showing me just an unordered list of documents, you can say, hey, order this by X, Y, and Z. These JSON documents are stored in an Oracle database in a table at the end of the day. We're just abstracting that out from you so you don't see it. But if you are savvy with SQL, which I'm guessing many of you are, you can see the SQL under the covers by clicking this button. So this is the code that we're running to get this list of documents back. Now, if you need to create a new collection, just click this button. Same dialog like we have for creating new tables. All of the metadata properties you input here, we create the item for you. If you want to upload new documents to your collection, you can do that. If you want to create an index on your collection, you can do that. So, performance is always key if you want to make things faster. It helps to tell the database about attributes in the document that are of interest. So here's everything in the document available. So I'm just going to index that and create. And now I've got my new index. I gave that index a horrible name, but there it is. We can also create relational views over these documents, which I've already done. But we could do a new one here. So this is basically saying, allow me to write SQL against my collection. Sorry, add all. So now I just need to come in here and pick things off, order the things that I want them in. So in this case, I've got just this single column. It doesn't really make sense. And I can say test query. It's like, here is the SQL behind this query. And I can run this to see what that looks like. And if I click create, it's going to create the view behind this, which I've already done. So when we were looking over here, that tweets stuff, tweets view, this isn't actually a table with columns. This is a table with entire JSON documents where I've abstracted out those attributes as columns that the SQL engine can read. Charts. So you saw me mention this coming into the SQL worksheet. So I've got the SQL already written. If you want to come in here and start a chart from scratch, going to be pretty similar. So my new chart, whatever, valid query. So let's do select average ID. So over here, I'm just going to give it the text column and the value column. I can say preview, my chart type to be line chart, or I want my chart type to be horizontal. I don't know if that makes sense, but it is what it is. I've chosen to put the grouping and the averaging, basically the math inside the query. You can have the browser and the JavaScript do that for you. Once you get, thousands and thousands of values back, it's going to bog down a little bit. But if you use your SQL skills to let the database do the math, this stuff is going to be pretty fast and whiz bang. So I'm just going to create the chart. So I brought up this chart. This is the only one I'm looking at because I created it. We automatically added a filter up here to show you just the one chart, but I can click this X button. Now I've got all my charts. So here's one I created. Mouse over it to get the details. Again, this is version 1 of this feature. There's a lot more coming, so stay tuned. Okay, database users. So on the administration side, I'm logged in as HR. I'm God. I can do anything I want. I might want to create a new user. YouTube. I'm going to give them 25 megs quota. I'm going to let them come in. I'm going to give them access to SQL Dev Web. And on the granted roles side, so they've got connect, and I think maybe they've also got resource by default. But what else do I want them to have? Maybe that's all I want them to have. So I'm going to say create user. So YouTube got created. Now there's a link here that person can go use to access their account. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to open a new incognito window. Come in. Look how the cards are different. I'm seeing much less stuff. And if I come on the database users, it's not going to let me create a new user. All it's basically going to let me do is reset my own password, because that's all this user is able to do to his own user. So I can come in on any account in the database. I can see last time they logged in. I can see if they're REST enabled. I can see their account status if they're locked. You can also view this report instead of these cards. You can pull it into a grid. I can delete the user. That seems harsh. There'll be more administrative features coming in upcoming releases. Now on the monitoring side, let's see what's happening in my database right now. So I can see I'm running on 19C. It's been up for a week. That's probably when I got back from vacation. I've got a couple of clients connected. I don't have very much IO going on. Here are my top SQL statements. Here are my wait events. And as I leave this open, these charts will continue to paint. Some of these have drill downs associated with them. So I clicked on the weights panel and it brought up perfhub. I'm going to come back to monitoring. So this is the default monitoring page. But remember, I can come up here to mega menu and come back to instance viewer if I want. There's also a memory and storage indicator, so you can see where you're at in terms of I/O and space usage and that kind of stuff. But a lot of times we just really focus on top SQL. So here are the details on this SQL statement. I can see the plan on this statement. I can come into the ash and see what the elapsed time looks like over time. And if I want, I can ask the database for tuning advice on it. So my SQL tuning advice, no recommendations, because my SQL is perfect, obviously. So we got Performance Hub. So if you're in 19C or higher, you'll have access to Performance Hub. If you're on something older than 19C, we have our own SQL Monitor, a real-time SQL monitoring interface. This is the same Perf Hub you would see in EM. Same little sliders, so I can get different windows. You can see what I've been doing here as I've been recording this video. So if I narrow that window, it narrows what we're looking at here. Pretty much HR, just me. The benefits of a single instance, single user system. So that's Perf Hub, that's Instance Viewer. Everything else here is generally just a bunch of nice reports. So I'm not going to show you all of these. We'll just look at one as an example. Let's look at sessions. So I can click on a session. Here I've got these ORDS public user sessions. These are the pool sessions running out of ORDS that make things like SQL Developer Web work. If I come in here and look for username is equal to HR, we can find my SQL Developer desktop user. And I click on this entry in the grid, and then I can see what I've been doing over in my desktop. These aren't read-write yet, so I don't have a kill trace yet. That's coming soon. Similar if I come into storage, I can see what's going on in my database. I do not have like extend table space type stuff, but that's what we're working on going forward, is bringing in more of the administrative and monitoring features into the tool so I can make changes to the init parameters versus just seeing what the init parameters are, which by the way you can do. Okay, so I need to cut this video down and produce it, make it all nice. I'm sitting at 50 plus minutes. I'm going to do my best to make it shorter than that. I want to thank those folks that have stayed on to the end. If you've made it this far, you're sadists. I don't know what to say. Maybe you need some help watching me talk for 15 minutes, give or take. But I do want to thank you for that. If you have questions about any of these features, you can get details on my blog. If you don't know what that is, it's easy to find. That Jeff Smith. Some of the stuff I've shown you today is pretty new, and I've got posts showing all of the different new things. Like here's a post on just creating indexes for your JSON documents where I go into way greater detail than I showed here for the few minutes. If you want to figure out how to download and install and use this stuff in your environment, then I have a specific YouTube video that shows you how to download, deploy, configure words for SQL Developer Web or database actions, and I'll include the link for that in the description. Thanks everyone for your time, and have a great weekend.